I think we were far away from the heavy metal thing, because that seems to have a, they're all quite similar, a lot of these bands, They've all got these sort of, oh, sorry, I'm bumping the mic here. They've all got these pre-planned footsteps and stuff.
And the spandex tights and all the gear.
Yeah, and they've always got the guy with the blonde rug going. And the drummer that smiles at the camera.
AC/DC has always been that band that didn't follow the rules. They made their own. Their story isn't just about loud guitars and packed arenas. It's about standing their ground, even when the biggest names in rock came knocking. They weren't chasing fame, they were chasing freedom. Freedom to sound how they wanted, perform when they wanted, and never, ever play second to anyone. In the early 1980s, AC/DC wasn't just another rock band trying to make it big. They had already faced tragedy, losing their original frontman Bon Scott, a loss that could have broken them completely. But instead of giving up, they came back with a vengeance. Their new album, Back in Black, wasn't just a comeback. It was a thunderclap that shook the entire world of rock. With Brian Johnson taking the mic, their sound got sharper, heavier, and more unapologetic. Every riff hit like lightning, and the world took notice. Suddenly, they weren't the scrappy kids from Australia anymore. They were the headliners every promoter dreamed of booking. But when the Rolling Stones, the kings of rock and roll, offered AC/DC a massive opportunity to open for them on their Tattoo You tour in 1981, the band's response stunned everyone. The Stones were at their peak, their tour dominating America and pulling in millions. Most artists would have given anything just to share the same stage. But AC/DC? They said no. Malcolm Young didn't hesitate. When their management brought up the offer, he simply said, "We're better than the Stones." It wasn't ego, it was self-belief. AC/DC had clawed their way to the top on their own terms. They didn't want to be introduced as anyone's opener, not even for the most legendary band in rock history. So instead of taking the safe route, they doubled down. They launched their own tour, often playing the same arenas the Stones had just sold out. And to everyone's shock, they packed those venues too. Fans didn't want half a show before the Stones came on. They wanted the full AC/DC experience. The sweat, the energy, the power. The gamble paid off completely. Their own shows became a massive success, and the band's reputation grew even stronger. What could have been seen as career suicide turned into one of the boldest power moves in rock history. They proved that if you believed in yourself enough, you didn't need anyone's shadow to shine in. Even the Stones respected them for it. There was no lasting grudge, just mutual respect between two bands that understood what it meant to stay true to their art. But the road to independence wasn't always smooth. Years earlier, back in 1975, before the fame and the stadiums, AC/DC was still grinding their way through Australia's rough and tumble rock scene. The Sunbury Festival was supposed to be their big break, their moment to show the world what they were made of. Thousands of fans, massive stage, and cameras rolling. But instead of a career-defining show, it turned into one of the most chaotic moments in Australian rock history. The headliners that year were Deep Purple, a band already massive worldwide. They were treated like royalty, arriving in luxury caravans while local bands, including AC/DC, were shoved into a single small van. The difference in treatment was crystal clear. Deep Purple's crew strutted around the festival grounds like they owned the place, while younger bands were left waiting for scraps. Then things got ugly. Deep Purple decided they didn't want to close the show anymore. They wanted to perform earlier, and that meant someone had to give up their slot. That someone was AC/DC. Festival organizers told them to switch, but the young brothers weren't having it. They had worked too hard to earn their time on stage, and they weren't about to be bullied by anyone, not even international stars. When AC/DC refused to move, Deep Purple's road crew started throwing their weight around, literally. They surrounded AC/DC's small team and began threatening them. Tensions escalated fast, and what started as an argument turned into a full-blown backstage brawl. Instruments smashed, fists flew, and chaos took over. The fight got so violent that security had to step in before things went completely off the rails. When the dust settled, AC/DC had a choice: play their set as if nothing happened or walk away in protest. They chose to walk. They packed up their gear and left the festival entirely, even though it meant losing exposure and money. That single act of defiance changed everything. Instead of seeing them as troublemakers, fans across Australia started seeing them as heroes, the band that stood up to arrogant outsiders. The newspapers picked up the story, and suddenly everyone knew who AC/DC was. Their reputation as the no-nonsense, tough-as-nails band was sealed right then and there. Deep Purple finished their set, but their attitude that day left a sour taste in the mouths of both fans and organizers. They might have had the fame, but AC/DC walked away with something more powerful: respect. Then came another unforgettable clash, this time in 1984 during the Monsters of Rock tour in Stockholm. By then, AC/DC were veterans, legends in their own right. But the tour lineup was wild, and one band in particular had a reputation for chaos: Mötley Crüe. The Crew were young, loud, and completely out of control. They had this bizarre habit they thought was funny: biting people. Literally, they'd bite their friends, their crew, even other rock stars as some kind of twisted bonding ritual. Most people laughed it off as just another crazy Mötley Crüe thing, but it didn't take long for it to go too far. One night, bassist Nikki Sixx decided to bite Eddie Van Halen on the shoulder, and all hell broke loose. Eddie snapped and threw Vince Neil across a table, and within seconds, the backstage area turned into a madhouse. Right in the middle of the chaos was Malcolm Young, watching the insanity unfold. Nikki turned toward him, maybe thinking he'd join in on the fun. But Malcolm wasn't amused. He gave him that trademark stare and said flatly, "You bite me, mate, and I'll chew your ear off." For a second, it seemed like that might end it, but Nikki pushed it further. He grabbed Malcolm by the hair and slammed him into the wall, and that's when everything exploded. Security rushed in as punches flew and tempers boiled over. The whole scene was pure madness. When it was over, AC/DC had made up their minds. That was the last time they'd ever share a stage with Mötley Crüe. The Young brothers didn't care how popular the band was or how wild their fan base got. They had no patience for childish behavior or ego trips. To them, rock and roll was serious business: passion, sweat, and respect, not pranks that ended with people bleeding. That decision said everything about AC/DC's character. They didn't start fights, but they never backed down either. Their reputation for toughness wasn't an image, it was real. They came from working class roots, where loyalty and hard work mattered more than fame or fortune. Every feud, every clash, and every bold refusal along the way built the foundation of their legacy. They weren't the kind of band that smiled for the cameras or followed the industry's playbook. They built a world where they called the shots, even when it meant walking away from huge opportunities. AC/DC's journey has always been more than music. It's a story about integrity in an industry that often forgets what that word means. They never chased trends or begged for attention. They trusted their gut, and it never led them wrong. Turning down the Rolling Stones wasn't arrogance. Standing up to Deep Purple wasn't rebellion. And refusing to tour with Mötley Crüe wasn't fear, it was principle. They knew exactly who they were, a band that didn't need validation from anyone. Whether it was a small Australian festival or a massive world tour, AC/DC gave everything they had, every night. Their music wasn't meant to fit in, it was meant to shake the walls, to make you feel something raw and real. After the madness with Mötley Crüe, the tour limped forward in chaos. Their manager, Doc McGee, spent the rest of the trip cleaning up after his band's disasters, apologizing to anyone who would still listen. The hotels weren't as forgiving. Mötley Crüe got kicked out for their insane antics, and from that day forward, AC/DC made one thing crystal clear: they would never, under any circumstances, share a tour with them again. That incident didn't just leave bruises, it left a lesson. AC/DC wanted no part of the circus that rock and roll was turning into. They weren't there to play games or get headlines for scandals. They wanted to do one thing: play their music loud and honest. And soon, another story would test just how serious they were about that. This time, it was with the legendary KISS, a band that practically defined showmanship. Back in the late 1970s, AC/DC was still trying to crack America. They were known in Australia, but the US was the big league, and breaking through there was every band's dream. Their unexpected savior came in the form of Gene Simmons. Gene was already a superstar. KISS was selling out arenas across the world, dripping in makeup, pyrotechnics, and stage theatrics. But one night in Los Angeles, Simmons walked into a small club, looking for something fresh. On that tiny stage stood AC/DC, giving everything they had. Angus Young, in his iconic schoolboy uniform, tore across the stage like a man possessed. The power, the grit, the electricity, it was raw, real, and unlike anything Gene had seen in years. Even when the lights went out between songs, Angus didn't stop. He just kept playing in the dark. That kind of hunger hit Gene hard. After the show, Simmons went backstage to meet the band. Angus was missing 2 front teeth. They couldn't even afford dental work at the time, but that didn't matter. What Gene saw wasn't poverty, it was pure potential. He took them out for a meal, where Angus ordered a hot dog, completely unfazed by fame or formalities. It was clear these guys weren't putting on an act. They were the real thing. Gene decided to help them. He pulled some strings and got AC/DC on KISS's massive Alive 2 tour, their first real shot at America. Night after night, AC/DC played their hearts out to packed arenas. Fans who came for KISS ended up leaving as AC/DC believers, chanting their name, demanding encores. Their energy was infectious, and even KISS members admitted they were blown away. Paul Stanley later said Angus's energy was mind-boggling. Gene said the band's sound hit him like a wall. But while both bands respected each other's talent, the cracks started showing backstage. AC/DC was all about raw authenticity, no smoke, no mirrors, no costumes, just sweat and guitars. KISS was the exact opposite. Their whole identity was built on fire, makeup, and spectacle. For KISS, the show was as important as the music. For AC/DC, the show was the music. That difference started turning into tension. AC/DC thought KISS's theatrical act felt fake, like a distraction from what rock was supposed to be. The Young brothers weren't interested in selling an image. They wanted to make people feel something real. To them, KISS was the commercial side of rock, more merchandise than music. KISS didn't see it that way. Gene and Paul argued that their shows were about giving fans an unforgettable experience, something that touched all the senses. They believed AC/DC was being narrow-minded, refusing to see that showmanship was part of the art. The arguments got heated. There were backstage debates, mocking comments, and a growing sense that the two bands just didn't belong on the same bill. One night after a KISS show, Angus and Bon Scott left early, frustrated with the endless explosions and makeup routines. They didn't see passion, they saw performance. Eventually, KISS stopped inviting AC/DC to open their shows. Both bands went their own way, and neither looked back. Over time, history would prove AC/DC right in its own way. While KISS ruled the 70s with spectacle, that style faded by the 90s when fans started craving something more real. AC/DC didn't need to reinvent themselves or chase trends. They'd been genuine from day one. When flash and fame faded, authenticity was all that was left. Then came Aerosmith, and this story wasn't about creative differences. It was about chaos. By 1978, Aerosmith was America's biggest rock band. They were living legends with hits like Dream On and Sweet Emotion. When they invited AC/DC to open for them on their US tour, it felt like a dream come true. For a young Australian band trying to conquer the American market, this was everything. But that dream turned out to be a nightmare. Aerosmith was falling apart behind the scenes, drowning in addiction and ego. Steven Tyler could barely stand on stage most nights, slurring lyrics, stumbling through songs. The band was out of sync, forgetting chords and verses in front of thousands. Meanwhile, AC/DC showed up to every show ready to work. They played their hearts out, hitting every note with precision and fire. Their energy made Aerosmith look like amateurs. The contrast was brutal. One band hungry to prove themselves, the other too wasted to care. But not every American audience was ready for AC/DC's raw sound. Aerosmith fans expected familiar radio hits, not the thunderous, no-nonsense style that AC/DC brought. Some fans didn't get it. They booed, threw cups, even hurled insults. In Fresno, things got so bad that someone threw a cup straight at Angus's face mid-performance. Angus, never one to take disrespect, grabbed the mic and told the entire crowd exactly where to go before walking off stage. Backstage, the band was furious. They couldn't believe how unprofessional Aerosmith had become, or how little they respected the fans. For AC/DC, every show was sacred. They played every night like it could be their last. Watching Aerosmith waste that platform lit a fire under them. It became a lesson in what not to become. The tour was a disaster for Aerosmith, but strangely beneficial for AC/DC. Critics started writing about how the opening band was outperforming the headliners every night. Industry insiders took notice. AC/DC's name started circulating, not as a band trying to make it, but as one that was already ready. Aerosmith, on the other hand, hit rock bottom soon after. Their addiction problems tore the band apart, and it would take them nearly a decade to recover. By then, AC/DC had already cemented their place among rock's elite, and they never accepted another tour invite from Aerosmith again. And then there was Black Sabbath, the titans of heavy metal, the gods of dark riffs and doom. When AC/DC got the chance to tour with them in Europe, it sounded like a dream pairing. Two hard-hitting, no-nonsense bands sharing the same stage. What could go wrong? As it turns out, plenty. Black Sabbath was in chaos at the time. Ozzy Osbourne and the rest of the band were deep in their own personal battles, barely keeping it together. AC/DC, meanwhile, had just been dropped by their American label after Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. They had a lot to prove. At first, things went smoothly. Bon Scott and Ozzy Osbourne hit it off immediately, two wild souls cut from the same cloth. They drank, joked, and shared stories like old friends. But one night in a hotel bar, everything changed. The story that followed became one of rock's most infamous backstage tales. It involved Malcolm Young and Sabbath bassist Geezer Butler, and depending on who you ask, there are two completely different versions of what happened. Malcolm's version goes like this: he walked into the bar and found Geezer drunk and miserable, ranting about how tired he was of being in Sabbath. Geezer told a very different story later. He admitted he had a knife but said he'd just bought it in Switzerland and was playing with it, not threatening anyone. He claimed Malcolm came over, started mocking Sabbath, and misunderstood the situation. Whatever the truth, things escalated fast. Witnesses say voices got louder, tension built, and suddenly Ozzy Osbourne stormed in, shouting at Geezer to go to bed. But by then, it was too late. According to AC/DC bassist Mark Evans, Geezer really did wave the knife around, and Malcolm, never one to back down, swung first. One punch, Geezer hit the floor, knocked out cold. The room went dead silent. Hotel staff rushed in, crew members dragged people apart, and the fight was over as quickly as it began, but the damage was done. The next morning, Sabbath's management demanded AC/DC be kicked off the tour immediately. They called Malcolm violent and unpredictable. AC/DC was told to pack their gear and leave. Malcolm never apologized. Years later, he still insisted he was just defending himself and didn't regret a thing. That was the last time AC/DC and Black Sabbath ever toured together. Whatever friendship had existed between Bon and Ozzy faded, replaced by quiet distance. These weren't just fights or clashes of ego. Each one told the world exactly what AC/DC stood for. They didn't bend for money, fame, or big names. They didn't tolerate disrespect, not from other bands, not from fans, not from anyone. They believed in real rock, the kind that doesn't need makeup, explosions, or drama. The kind that comes from the gut, not a marketing plan. Every feud, every refusal, every punch thrown in a smoky hotel bar added to their legend. They weren't saints, but they were authentic to the core. AC/DC walked through chaos, tragedy, and confrontation and came out stronger every time.
That's a hard thing for me to say, you know? Because, you know, when you're creating it, yeah, you kind of hope. That part I don't know, but this is, it's very difficult to say. I know exactly what people were like. But the other one was Girls Got Rhythm. Those two tracks we'd had in the first couple of weeks, but it was that weekend we ended up.
They didn't just play rock and roll, they lived it. Every decision they made, right or wrong, came from the same place: pride in what they built and faith in what they could do. In the end, those 6 stories aren't just tales of fights or rivalries. They're a blueprint for how AC/DC became what they are. A band that never compromised, never sold out, and never pretended to be anything they weren't. They proved that real music doesn't need validation. It just needs a heartbeat, a riff, and a band crazy enough to play it louder than anyone else ever could.